What is up? What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Off the Top Rope on the Off the Mic Sports Network. So, the big news that has been developing since Sunday after Clash in Paris is the seemingly developing story and almost inevitability at this point that AJ Lee, after a decade away, is going to return to professional wrestling. Although she did have a little brief run there in WOW, Wow Wrestling, the Women of Wrestling, the project with the Jeannie Buss a couple years back. But the first time that she will appear on WWE television in a decade, it's seemingly inevitable. I'd be shocked at this point if it didn't happen. And it's been reported that this match, that is, like I said, seemingly like really in everybody's minds, been AJ Lee teaming with her real life husband CM Punk to take on Becky Lynch and her real life husband Seth Rollins at WrestlePalooza on September 20th in Indianapolis. So, what I found really interesting about this story, first and foremost, is I think AEW fans are panicking. They're shitting bricks right now. And you want to know why I know that? Because a lot of AEW sickos are compiling narratives and revisionist history that AJ Lee is not even that good or is overrated or is kind of a thing of the past. And this is just, this is kind of a cheap ploy. Now, that last piece I can kind of see because, hey, we're less than 3 weeks away from this show that came out of thin air, and it's the first show on ESPN. And AJ Lee, who seemingly balked at returning to this company for, like I said, a decade, is now all of a sudden going to come back for a match teaming up with her husband in what could be a one-off appearance, but it's been reported that maybe it isn't a one-off appearance. Who knows? But the people, and most of these people are either people who don't like CM Punk, who are AEW sickos who are in complete and utter denial, or AEW people who know deep down in their minds, even though they'll tell you until they're blue in the face that All Out's going to be a better show, they're petrified because AEW is going to get murdered on September 20th. And I'm going to have a story on this and a question for the fan base here of this channel about the overall outlook for September 20th, All Out versus WrestlePalooza, basically dueling against each other for wrestling fans' affection a couple weeks from Saturday. So people seemingly are just trying to like rewrite history and act like AJ Lee was a blip on the radar and a flash in the pan and didn't matter and is insignificant in the grand scheme of wrestling and women's wrestling. If you're one of these people and you're trying to form this in your mind, I've already said who you are because that's the only rationale that I can come up with. Because if you truly think that AJ Lee is overrated, or if you think that AJ Lee's contributions to the wrestling industry are really insignificant and she doesn't have any great matches in her catalog, you are just a hater. Or you just really, you have a miserable life as far as I'm concerned. This woman, in a dark time for women's wrestling where they were scratching and clawing for time, in a time for Total Divas, which was actually kind of good in hindsight for the women's division, this woman was the anti-diva alongside Paige. She came before Paige. Remember the famed or the infamous NXT reality show season for women? You remember? Naomi was on that season. Look at where Naomi is, as accomplished as she's ever been. AJ Lee was on that season. And then AJ Lee turned herself into a GM. She had a fake wedding with Daniel Bryan. She had this whole crazy chick gimmick. And ultimately it led to her meeting her husband, CM Punk. And then for a year after CM Punk walked out of this place, she had to walk down the halls and walk into arenas and hear her husband's name chanted. And then on her wedding day, her husband got fired. So this woman has been through a lot of things, but I would make this argument in saying there is no women's revolution. You cannot tell the story of the women's revolution and the groundswell. Like Natalya doesn't get nearly enough credit, and she deserves a lot of credit. Trinity, obviously, I've talked about Naomi's. AJ Lee is one of the biggest faces of this and doesn't get nearly the amount of credit because of all of the personal stuff that was going on between it being Punk, between it being her issues with Vince McMahon. Like there was a lot of things out there. And I think people forget how great this woman had one of the longest women's championship runs as the Divas champion before Nikki Bella bested it out of sheer pettiness, by the way. Like, her ability to tell stories, her ability to get involved in men's angles, her ability to connect with the audience was unlike anything that we had seen in the women's division during a time where the women's division in a large scale was not presented well. It was not presented well. And this woman managed to make herself a star. And she was, and here's the other part of it that I also judge. Roxanne Perez was a fan of AJ. Bailey, fan of AJ, friend of AJ. There are so many people in this industry right now who grew up idolizing and wanted to get into women's professional wrestling because of AJ Lee. Not because of how she looked, not because she got in a bikini, but because she went in there and despite her size, which was one thing that kind of worked against her, she was a smaller lady, went out there and defied the odds in a time where women's wrestling was not well thought of. Let's just call it what it is. So if you're one of these people who's trying to diminish how big of a deal this is that AJ Lee is coming back to professional wrestling after 10 years away, despite that little blip on the radar with women of wrestling, you're just a hater. Or you're an AEW fan who's completely, utterly petrified that this is going to fucking destroy you on September 20th. CM Punk is back with your competitor. Now his wife, who hasn't thought about coming back to wrestling outside of being an executive producer on another project. She has largely stayed out of the wrestling sphere. And she's coming back to wrestling to go beat you. That's why you're scared. And that's why you're trying to rewrite history that AJ Lee doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of women's wrestling. We are not at the point that we are having two evolutions without AJ Lee. That is a fact. That is a fact. This woman defied so many different odds and so many different barriers before all of them got broken down in 2015 when the women's evolution really became a thing. Naomi, Natalia, obviously AJ Lee, the Bellas, even though the Bellas, like in the grand scheme of things, people think of them more in the total divas mindset. All of those women are influential to this. AJ Lee was different because she was a wrestling fan. She came in there and wrestled. It wasn't just about the look part of it. And in a time where these women were fighting for time, she found a way to stand out and make things different. That's why people are excited to see her back. And if you're one of these AEW schmucks, or if you're just somebody who hates CM Punk, that's really the only reason why you think that this doesn't mean anything. Because outside of that, I don't understand how you're not excited about this. This is a big fucking deal. Separate from that, I think this is completely rushed and it should be saved for a much bigger education, but WWE is so fucking petty that they don't give a shit. They'll leverage anything they can to screw AEW and make as much money as they can on any show that they can, which is gross, but hey, that's what we are. It's corporate greed, man. Corporate greed. Anyway, thanks so much, everybody, for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.